All stories are dramatized recreations. Named locations are fictionalized. Any resemblance to real persons is coincidental.
Chloe, nail technician. The vibration was a dull, foreign buzz against the cool marble of the bathroom countertop. Not mine. My phone was in my back pocket, a silent, dead weight. This was his, Daniel's. It lit up the dim, steam-filled room, a stark, electric rectangle against the muted tones of our life. Our supposed life. He was in the shower, singing some off-key classic rock, the water pounding a rhythm that drowned out the world. A world that was, in this instant, narrowing to the glow of that screen. I wasn't a snoop. I was a curator of quiet, a preserver of peace. My hands spent their days creating tiny, perfect works of art on the fingertips of strangers, listening to their dramas, their joys, their secrets. I came home to silence, to the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the soft click of my son's bedroom door closing. I liked the quiet. I cultivated it. Looking at my husband's phone felt like shouting in a sacred space. But it buzzed again, insistent, a double text. And the first line of the message, illuminated for anyone to see, was a knife to the throat of my quiet life. Miss you already, my little bird. Can't wait for the next. The rest was hidden by the notification shade. My little bird. The steam from the shower suddenly felt thick, suffocating. It coated my lungs. My little bird. He called me Chloe. Always had, for 11 years. It was love you, Chloe, scribbled on a post-it note. Grab milk, Chloe, texted from the grocery store. You okay, Chloe? Whispered in the dark after a bad dream. My little bird was poetic. It was intimate. It was for someone whose wings he wanted to trace, not for someone whose hands were always busy cleaning, cooking, filing, polishing. The water shut off. The sudden silence was louder than the spray had been. My heart wasn't beating. It was a trapped, frantic thing trying to batter its way out of my ribs. I stared at my reflection in the mirror, blurred by condensation. A pale face, wide green eyes, hair starting to frizz in the humidity. Chloe, the nail technician. Chloe, the wife. Chloe, the mother. Who was I in this moment? The woman about to confront her husband, or the woman about to pretend she saw nothing, to preserve the quiet for one more night? The glass shower door slid open with a rasp. Daniel emerged, a towel around his waist, another scrubbing at his hair. He was smiling, relaxed, his skin pink from the heat. God, that feels good. You should hop in, the water's still perfect. He didn't look at me, he looked at his phone. His smile didn't fade, it softened, became private. His thumb swiped to unlock it, to read the rest of the message. I found my voice. It didn't sound like mine. It was flat, a stone dropped into a deep well. Who calls you my little bird? His head snapped up. The private smile vanished, replaced by a flicker of something so fast and so feral I would spend nights trying to identify it. Panic. Guilt. Then nothing, a blank mask. What? Your phone? I gestured with my chin, my arms locked at my sides. It lit up. It said, miss you already, my little bird. The endearment felt like ash in my mouth. He looked down at the phone in his hand as if seeing it for the first time. He gave a short, forced laugh. It was the wrong sound, too high, too sharp. Oh, that's just Pete, from the golf trip, inside joke, you know how he is. Pete. Balding, with a knee brace and a perpetual smirk. The idea of Pete sending a text that began with miss you already, my little bird, was so ludicrous it was offensive. The lie was cheap. Flimsy. He thought I was that stupid. The curator of quiet, the little woman who did nails, wouldn't question it. I just looked at him. I didn't speak. I let the silence grow, let it fill the space between us with everything he wasn't saying. My stillness was a language he didn't know how to speak. He fumbled, his fingers clumsy on the screen. See, he said, his voice too hearty, turning the phone toward me. He'd opened the message thread. I saw a name at the top, Pete W., and a single, visible message. The one I'd seen. It was a pathetic, transparent pantomime. He'd clearly just renamed someone. The action was so cowardly, so insultingly clumsy, that the pain finally broke through the numbness. It wasn't a sharp pain. It was a vast, cold emptiness opening up inside me, right in the center of my being. The quiet I loved so much was now a void. You were on a golf trip, I said, my voice still that terrible, flat calm. You told me the service was spotty. You barely texted me for 3 days. It was, babe, it really was. I just got this now, must have come through late. He was digging the hole deeper, shoveling lies into the chasm between us. I thought of my hands. All day, they had held the hands of other women. I had smoothed calluses, pushed back cuticles, painted stories in lacquer and glitter. I had listened to a woman named Sarah talk about her upcoming anniversary cruise. I had reassured a teenage girl that her nail-biting anxiety was nothing to be ashamed of. I had created beauty and offered comfort with these hands, and now they hung empty at my sides, useless. They could not polish this truth. They could not file this reality into a smoother shape. I turned away from him. I walked out of the bathroom, the plush carpet absorbing the sound of my footsteps. The quiet of the house was different now. It wasn't peaceful. It was accusatory. Every object in our bedroom, the framed wedding photo, the book on his nightstand, the sweater I'd knitted him, was a witness to the lie. I ended up in the kitchen, leaning against the cold stainless steel of the refrigerator. The hum was still there, but it sounded like a moan. I heard him moving in the bedroom, a frantic, hushed energy, probably deleting the evidence, creating a better alibi. The realization didn't come as a scream or a sob. It came as a simple, devastating sentence that formed in my mind with the clarity of a diamond-tipped drill bit. This is how it happens. This is how a marriage of 11 years ends. Not with a bang, but with a buzz. Not with a confession, but with a wrong pet name on a screen in a steamy bathroom. The foundation of everything you've built doesn't CRBly. It just vaporizes, leaving you standing on nothing, in a quiet that is no longer peaceful, but profoundly and utterly alone. The quiet in the kitchen was a living thing. It pressed against my eardrums, a high-pitched hum that was louder than any noise. I could still feel the cold of the refrigerator door against my back, a solid, real sensation anchoring me to a world that had just become surreal. From down the hall, I could hear the faint, frantic sounds of Daniel moving in our bedroom, a drawer opening and closing too quickly, the soft thud of something being placed on the bed, the hushed, muffled tone of his voice. He was on the phone, talking to her, apologizing, warning her. I didn't know, I didn't want to know. My feet were rooted to the spot, nail technician. The title echoed in my head, a pathetic little identifier. I was the person who made conversations with women about their cuticles while their lives unfolded over my workstation. I was the background noise to other people's dramas. And now my own drama was here, and I had no script. My hands, usually so steady, so precise, were trembling. I looked down at them. The short, practical nails, the cuticles neat and pushed back. These hands built a life. They held my son when he was born. They cooked 11 years of meals. They folded 11 years of laundry, and they were utterly useless now. I heard his footsteps coming down the hall. They were hesitant, slower than his usual confident stride. He was composing himself, preparing his lines. I didn't turn around. I kept my back to him, my gaze fixed on the digital clock on the oven, 9:47 p.m., the time our marriage ended. Chloe. His voice was soft, placating. The voice you use on a spooked animal. It made my skin crawl. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat was sealed shut with a cement of betrayal and sheer, unadulterated rage. He came around to stand in front of me, blocking my view of the clock. He was dressed now in sweatpants and a t-shirt. His hair was still damp. He looked like my husband. He smelled like my shower gel. It was a cruel trick. Baby, listen, I can explain. You've got the wrong idea. The wrong idea. The phrase was so absurd it finally unlocked my voice. It came out a raspy whisper. The wrong idea? Daniel, I read it. My little bird. You looked me in the eye and said it was Pete. I managed to lift my gaze to his. Do you think I'm an idiot? His face crumpled, not into guilt, but into a performance of exasperation. No, of course I don't. It's complicated, Chloe. Work is, there's this client. She's fragile. It's just flirting. It's nothing real. It doesn't mean anything. Every word was another twist of the knife. Fragile. Flirting doesn't mean anything. I thought of the text, the intimacy of that pet name, the ease of it. This wasn't a first time. How long? The question was flat. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I used to find endearing. Now it looked like a stall tactic. I don't know, a few months. It just happened. The golf trip, it got out of hand. I'm so sorry. It was a mistake. A few months. The words landed like physical blows. Months. He had kissed me goodbye, gone to play golf with his buddies, and had been with her. He had called me from the resort, his voice easy, asking about my day, about our son, all while she was probably in the room. The duality of it was monstrous. "Her name," I said. My voice was colder now. The numbness was receding, burned away by a rising inferno. He sighed as if I were being difficult. "Does it matter?" "Yes." The word was a bullet. "Lydia," he said it softly, almost reverently. "Her name is Lydia. She works in marketing. I met her on the Palmer account." Lydia, a name, a person, not a faceless entity. A woman with a job in marketing, I could picture her. Sharp suit, designer heels. A laugh that wasn't worn down by 11 years of mortgage payments and pediatrician appointments. My world, my quiet, curated world of nail polish and packed lunches, was being invaded by a woman named Lydia from marketing. "I want you to leave," I said. The sentence surprised me. I hadn't known I was going to say it until the words were in the air, hanging between us, solid and real. His performance cracked. Real panic flashed in his eyes. "What?" "Chloe, no. Come on, let's talk about this. We can fix this. I'll end it. I'll never speak to her again. It was a stupid mistake." "You lied to my face 5 minutes ago, Daniel. You looked at me and you lied. You renamed her in your phone like I was some suspicious girlfriend you needed to placate. Not your wife, not the mother of your child." The volume of my voice was rising, scraping against the quiet of the house. I was terrified of waking our son, but I couldn't stop. "You don't get to call this a mistake. A mistake is forgetting to buy milk. This is 1,000 choices. Every text you sent was a choice. Every lie you told was a choice. Getting on that plane was a choice." "I love you," he pleaded, his voice breaking with what sounded like genuine emotion. It was the most devastating part. He probably believed it in that moment. "No," I said, the fire suddenly gone, leaving absolute glacial certainty in its wake. "You don't get to say that. Not now. You need to go tonight." "Where am I supposed to go?" he asked, and he sounded like a lost little boy. It was a manipulation that had worked on me for over a decade. "Not tonight. To Pete's, to a hotel, to Lydia's, I don't care." I turned my back on him again, walking to the kitchen junk drawer. My hands were still shaking, but they knew what to do. I pulled out a black permanent marker. I walked to the hall closet, yanked out his largest duffel bag, and threw it on the floor at his feet. The sound was loud, final. "What are you doing?" he asked, horrified. I uncapped the marker. The smell of chemicals filled the air. I didn't answer him. I knelt down and, with a hand that had finally steadied, I began to write on the plain black fabric of the bag. Big block letters, one word. "Lydia's." I capped the marker. The sound was a full stop. I stood up and looked at him. There were no more tears, no more screams. There was just a vast, empty landscape where my marriage used to be. "Get out." The realization didn't feel like a victory. It felt like an amputation. This was the first real boundary I had ever drawn with him, and it was a line through the center of our lives. The person I was an hour ago would never have done this. She would have listened to his apologies. She would have believed his promises. She would have accepted the crumbs of his remorse and called it a meal, all to preserve the quiet. That woman was gone. She was shattered on the bathroom floor. The woman standing here now was someone new. Someone who knew the price of quiet was too high if it was paid with your dignity. He stared at the bag, at his name written so brutally on it. The fight drained out of him. He looked defeated. He looked old. Without another word, he turned and walked back down the hall to our bedroom. I didn't follow him. I stood in the kitchen, listening to the sounds of him packing. Each zip of a suitcase was like a suture on a wound that would never close properly. He emerged 20 minutes later, rolling a suitcase, the duffel bag with its damning label slung over his shoulder. He couldn't look at me. "I'll call you tomorrow," he mumbled, heading for the garage door. "Don't," I said. He paused, his hand on the doorknob. He didn't turn around. Then he was gone. The door clicked shut. The lock engaged with a heavy mechanical thud. The silence that descended was absolute. It was no longer peaceful. It was no longer a void. It was mine. It was terrible, and it was lonely, and it was the most honest thing I had felt in years. I was now the curator of a different kind of quiet. The kind that comes after the storm has razed everything to the ground. The silence after the garage door finished its groaning descent was a physical presence. It was heavier than any blanket, thicker than the steam in the bathroom had been. It pressed down on me, and for a long time, I just stood in the center of the kitchen. a statue in a museum of a life that was no longer mine. I was waiting for something, for the phone to ring, for him to come back saying it was all a terrible joke, for the world to right itself. But the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator, now a monotonous, grinding dirge. My body moved on an autopilot I didn't recognize. I walked through the downstairs, turning off lights. The living room lamp, which had cast a warm, golden glow on 1,000 ordinary evenings. The porch light, which had always been left on for him. Click, 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 each switch thrown was another small death. The house sank into darkness and I was alone in it, truly alone. I climbed the stairs, my hand skimming the banister we'd picked out together at a salvage yard, sanded and stained a rich walnut. Every object, every surface was a landmine of memory. I paused outside my son's door. Leo, 7 years old. His world was dinosaurs and building blocks and the specific way I cut the crusts off his sandwiches. His world was about to be irrevocably altered, and the weight of that truth almost brought me to my knees. I pushed the door open a crack. The nightlight shaped like a rocket ship cast a soft blue glow. He was asleep, one arm flung over his head, his breathing deep and even. Innocence personified. I watched him for a long time, trying to memorize the peace on his face, to store it up for the storm I knew was coming. I closed his door and faced my bedroom, our bedroom. The door felt like the entrance to a tomb. I pushed it open. The bed was unmade, his side a chaotic mess of blankets from his frantic packing. The room still smelled of his shower gel and his cologne. It smelled of him. My eyes scanned the room, and they landed on it immediately, the one thing he'd forgotten. A framed photo on his nightstand. It was from our wedding day. We were laughing, my head thrown back, his pressed against my temple, both of us looking impossibly young and certain of our forever. A sound escaped me then, a half-sob, half-gasp that was torn from somewhere deep inside. I stumbled to the bed, collapsing onto my side of it, and grabbed the frame. My thumbs stroked the glass over our smiling, ignorant faces. 11 years, we were just kids. I had trusted him with everything. I had built my entire adult existence around him. I was Chloe and Daniel. It was a single entity. And now I was just a Chloe. The second half had been brutally amputated, and I was left bleeding and raw, wondering if I could even survive as just one. I don't know how long I lay there, clutching that photo, the tears finally coming in hot, silent rivers that soaked the pillowcase. They weren't the dramatic sobs of a movie, they were a quiet, relentless leaking of pain. The grief wasn't just for the betrayal or for the loss of my husband. It was for the loss of the future. The family vacations we'd talked about. The way we'd be when Leo graduated. Growing old together on a porch somewhere. All of those futures, those possible worlds, were wiped out in an instant by a text message. They were ghost stories now. The crying eventually exhausted me into a numb, hollowed-out state. I placed the photo face down on the nightstand. I couldn't look at it. I changed into pajamas in the walk-in closet, avoiding looking at the empty spaces where his clothes had been. The closet seemed to mock me with its new spaciousness. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the text, "My little bird." I saw his face when he lied. I replayed every interaction from the last few months, examining them under this new, horrific light. His late work nights. His sudden interest in a new fitness app. The way he'd been subtly critical of me, picking at my clothes, my hair, my quietness. I thought it was stress. I'd even felt sorry for him. The humiliation was a poison, spreading through my veins. I had been so blind, so stupid. The woman who listened to other people's problems all day long couldn't see the catastrophe happening in her own home. The night stretched on, an endless, dark corridor of pain. I must have drifted off near dawn, because the next thing I knew, a small voice was pulling me from a fractured, anxious dream. "Mommy," I jerked awake. Sunlight was streaming through the gaps in the blinds. Leo was standing by my side of the bed, his favorite stuffed triceratops dangling from his hand. He looked confused. "Where's Daddy? His car isn't here." The question, so simple and innocent, was the emotional equivalent of being hit by a truck. I pushed myself up, my head throbbing, my eyes gritty and swollen. I had to be a mother now. I had to function. The world had ended, but the school bus was still coming. "Hey, sweetie," I said, my voice raspy. I cleared my throat, trying to sound normal. Daddy had a very early work meeting. He had to leave before the sun came up. The lie tasted like ash. I was becoming him. I was building my son's world on a foundation of lies to protect him, just as Daniel had built mine. Leo accepted this with a simple nod. Can we have chocolate chip pancakes? And just like that, the machinery of the day engaged. The world kept spinning. I made pancakes. I packed a lunchbox. I found his homework folder. I brushed his hair. I performed every task with a robotic efficiency, my mind screaming on the inside while my hands moved through the familiar motions. I was a ghost in my own life, going through the paces. Driving him to the bus stop was agony. The other moms were there, in their SUVs, waving and smiling. Did they know? Could they see the shame and devastation written on my face? I kept my sunglasses on. Have a good day, baby. I love you. I called out to Leo as he bounded onto the bus. He waved without looking back, and then I was alone again, the car idling at the curb. The silence returned, but it was different in the daylight. It was exposing. I looked at my hands on the steering wheel, the short, unpolished nails. These were the hands of a woman whose husband had left her for someone he met on a golf trip. The humiliation returned, fresh and acute. I didn't go home. I couldn't face that empty, memory-haunted house. I drove on autopilot, my vision blurry with unshed tears. I ended up in the parking lot of the grocery store. I needed milk, eggs, the mundane, stupid requirements of a life that insisted on continuing. I pushed the cart through the brightly lit, cheerful aisles. It was a surreal experience. People were choosing cereal, comparing prices on laundry detergent, laughing. How could they? How could the world just go on? I felt like I had a massive, gaping wound in my chest, and everyone was just politely stepping around the blood pooling at my feet. I turned into the cereal aisle, and I saw it, his favorite. The ridiculously sugary, brightly colored loops he'd eat by the handful straight from the box, like a little kid. A box of it was sitting on the shelf, right at eye level. The cartoon character on the front seemed to be laughing at me. The dam broke. It wasn't a quiet cry this time. It was a full, body-racking sob that tore out of me. I grabbed the box of cereal, clutching it to my chest like a life preserver, and slid down to the floor, right there in the middle of the aisle. My back against the cold metal shelf, I curled around the box and wept. I wept for the man who loved this stupid cereal. I wept for the future we wouldn't have. I wept for my son's innocence. I wept for the woman I was yesterday, who believed in things. Great, heaving sobs that made my entire body shake. I didn't care who saw. I didn't care about the other shoppers who quickly turned their carts away, giving me a wide berth. I was a spectacle of pure, undiluted grief, sitting on the linoleum floor of a food mart, holding a box of multicolored loops. This was the bottom. This was the raw, ugly, unfiltered truth of it. This was what happened when the quiet was finally shattered. You didn't become a graceful, tragic heroine. You became a broken woman crying in the cereal aisle, your heart physically aching in your chest, holding onto the ghost of a man who had chosen someone else. The realization was as simple as it was devastating. I had to feel this, all of it. There was no way around it. I had to sit on this dirty floor and hold this stupid cereal and let the pain wash over me until there was nothing left. Because this was the only way to the other side. The linoleum was cold and gritty against my legs. The bright, cheerful packaging of the cereal boxes surrounding me felt like a mockery of a celebration I wasn't invited to. My sobs had subsided into ragged, hitching breaths, the kind that leave your ribs sore. I was empty, drained. A vessel that had been filled to the brim with pain and then tipped over, spilling everything out onto the clean, waxed floor of the grocery store. An older woman with a kind, wrinkled face and a store apron finally approached, not with judgment, but with a quiet, practiced empathy. She didn't ask what was wrong. She just handed me a small packet of tissues and a bottle of water from a nearby cooler. "Take your time, honey," she murmured, her voice soft. "Ain't nobody gonna rush you." Her simple act of grace was the anchor I needed. I took the water, my hands shaking so badly I could barely unscrew the cap. The cold liquid felt like truth washing down my throat. I drank half the bottle in one go, then used the tissues to scrub the tears and mascara from my face. I was a mess. I looked like what I was, a woman who had just hit rock bottom in the cereal aisle. I pushed myself up, my legs weak. I left the cart where it was, the box of cereal placed carefully back on the shelf. I didn't need it. I didn't need any of it. I walked out of the store, the eyes of the other shoppers a dull pressure on my back, and drove home in a silence that was no longer accusing, but simply vacant. The house was exactly as I'd left it. Quiet. Empty. It didn't feel like a home, it felt like a crime scene. I walked from room to room, and this time I didn't see memories. I saw evidence. Evidence of a life built on a lie. The throw pillows we'd argued over. The coffee table he'd insisted was too modern. The books on the shelf, half his, half mine. It was all just stuff. It had no power over me anymore. The crying jag in the store had been an exorcism. The ghost of the woman I was had been purged. I ended up in the home office, a small nook off the living room that had become a dumping ground for bills, my nail tech supplies, and Leo's art projects. I cleared a space on the desk. I needed to do something. I needed to move, to act, to prove to myself that I was still a living, breathing entity capable of more than just weeping on floors. My laptop glowed to life. The screen asked for a password. For 11 years, it had been a variation of Leo's name and birthday. My password, my security, my world revolving around my son. I typed it in, and the desktop loaded. A photo of the three of us at the beach filled the screen. I winced but didn't look away. I opened a blank document. The cursor blinked, impatient, expectant. What was I doing? I wasn't a writer. I was a nail technician. My stories were told in French tips and amber fades. But the cursor kept blinking. And a thought, clear and sharp, cut through the fog in my mind. You need to remember this. So I began to type. I didn't think about grammar or style. I just let it pour out. I wrote about the feel of the cold marble under my palms in the bathroom. I wrote about the specific blue light of his phone screen. I wrote the exact words of the text. Miss you already, my little bird. I wrote about the sound of the shower stopping. I wrote about the look on his face, the panic, the quick calculation, the lie about Pete. I wrote about the permanent marker, the feel of it in my hand, the way the ink soaked into the fabric of the duffel bag as I branded him a liar for anyone to see. I wrote about the cereal. I wrote about the cold floor. I wrote it all down, every devastating detail. I didn't cry. I just transcribed the horror like a court reporter, bearing witness to my own destruction. The words stacked up on the screen, a brutal, unadorned record of the night my life ended. It was the most painful thing I had ever done, and also the most necessary. I was making it real. I was taking the chaotic, screaming pain inside me and giving it a shape, a form. I was pinning it to the page so it couldn't pin me down anymore. When I finally stopped, my fingers were stiff and the sun was beginning to set, casting long, orange shadows through the window. I had written over 3,000 words. I saved the document. I didn't name it. It was just there. A testament. The doorbell rang. The sound was so alien, so unexpected in the new silence of the house that I jumped. My heart hammered against my ribs. Daniel. It had to be Daniel. He'd come back. To talk, to apologize, to get more of his things, to see Leo. A part of me, the old, curated part, wanted to hide, to pretend I wasn't home, to let the silence deal with him. But the woman who had written her truth on a blank screen just stood up. She walked to the door. She didn't check her reflection. She didn't smooth her hair. She didn't care what she looked like. I pulled the door open. It wasn't Daniel. It was a young man in his late 20s, holding a large, flat cardboard box. He had a kind, open face and was wearing a uniform from a local packing and shipping store. "Delivery for Chloe Williams?" he asked cheerfully. I just stared at him, my brain struggling to process this normalcy. "Yes, that's me. Sign here, please." He handed me a digital pad. I scrawled my name, a meaningless scribble. He handed me the box. "Have a good one." He was gone before I could say anything. I carried the box inside, setting it on the cleared-off desk. The return address was from a law firm I didn't recognize. My name and address were printed in crisp, official type. A cold dread, different from the hot pain of before, began to trickle down my spine. This was it, the first official volley. He wasn't coming back to talk. He was sending papers. With trembling fingers, I tore the tape off the box. Inside, nestled in packing peanuts, wasn't a stack of legal documents. It was a painting. A small, beautiful oil painting in an ornate gold frame. It was a bird. A small, delicate sparrow, rendered in exquisite, hyper-realistic detail. It was perched on a bare branch against a stormy gray sky. But the bird wasn't looking defeated. Its head was tilted up, and in its eyes was a fierce, unbreakable glint of defiance. It was breathtaking, and it was from my grandmother. A note was tucked into the corner of the frame. "For my Chloe, I saw this and thought of you. It's time to fly, my dear. All my love, Gran." She'd sent it weeks ago, before any of this. It had just taken the shipping company forever to get it to me. The timing was cosmic. I sank into the chair, holding the painting, tears welling up again. But they were different tears. They weren't tears of despair. They were tears of recognition. My little bird, the phrase that had shattered my world, was being handed back to me, transformed. Daniel had used it as a cage, a pet name for a creature he thought was small and contained. My grandmother, without knowing any of it, had sent me my freedom. This bird wasn't little. It was mighty. It was facing the storm, not hiding from it. I looked from the painting to the laptop screen, filled with the raw, ugly truth of my pain. And then I looked at the blank journal my grandmother had given me for my last birthday, still sitting in its wrapping on a shelf. The realization wasn't a whisper. It was a clear, resonant bell tolling in the center of my soul. This was my path. This was my self-development. Not to forget the pain, but to document it, to bear witness. To take the shattered pieces of my life and not just glue them back together the way they were, but to create a new mosaic. A stronger one, a more beautiful one. The truth would be my foundation, not his lies, not my quiet compliance. I was a nail technician, but I was also a woman who had just spent the afternoon writing her own story for the first time. And I was a woman holding a painting of a bird that was ready to fly into the storm. I opened the journal to the first page. I picked up a pen, and I began to write, not on a screen, but on paper. The scratch of the nib was the only sound in the house. It was the sound of rebuilding, the sound of a new quiet, one I was creating for myself. The grief was still there. The betrayal was still a fresh wound. But for the first time since that moment in the bathroom, I felt a flicker of something else. It was small, but it was undeniable. It was power. The journal became my anchor in the storm. In the days that followed, it was the only thing that felt truly mine. The house was a museum of a failed marriage. Leo's questions about Daddy's extended business trip were landmines I had to tiptoe around with increasingly elaborate lies that made my soul feel filthy. My salon, once a place of zen-like focus and creative flow, was now a torture chamber where I had to paste on a smile and listen to other women's problems. A husband who forgot an anniversary, a boyfriend who was bad at texting back, and bite my tongue to keep from screaming, "At least he's not fucking someone from the golf club." But the journal was truth. It was the one place I didn't have to perform. I wrote in the dead of night, after Leo was asleep, with only the pool of light from my grandmother's old desk lamp illuminating the page. I didn't just write about the big things, the betrayal. I wrote about the small amputations, waking up and reaching for a body that wasn't there. Making coffee, for one. The way the silence in the house had a new, permanent quality to it. I wrote about the crushing loneliness that would hit me in the supermarket, at a red light, while folding a tiny pair of socks. I was documenting the anatomy of a breakdown, and in doing so, I was beginning to understand its parts. The pain wasn't a monolithic thing. It was layers. The top layer was the white-hot rage, the humiliation. Beneath that was a colder, deeper layer of grief for the life I thought I had. And beneath that, at the very bottom, was a terrifying, formless fear. The fear of being alone. The fear that I wasn't enough on my own. That without Daniel, I was just Chloe the nail technician, a woman defined by a service she performed for others. One entry, about a week after the night, was just a single sentence, scrawled over and over until the pen nearly tore through the paper. "I am so lonely I think my bones might crack from it." Writing it down didn't make it go away, but it made it real. It gave the feeling a shape and a boundary. I could close the journal and, for a few hours, contain the loneliness within its pages. It was a start. The legal papers arrived for real a few days later. Not a painting this time. A thick, crisp manila envelope delivered by a stern-looking process server. Divorce papers. Daniel was moving fast. Too fast. It felt less like a legal proceeding and more like a house being cleared of its contents before a demolition. I was the contents. I left the envelope unopened on the kitchen counter for 2 days. It sat there like a venomous spider, and I gave it a wide berth. On the third day, after dropping Leo at school, I made a pot of coffee I didn't want, sat at the kitchen table, and slid it open. The language was cold, legalese designed to strip emotion from the process. Petitioner, respondent, dissolution of marriage, but then I got to the sections on assets. Division of marital property, our house, our cars, our joint savings account, our retirement funds. It was all there, reduced to numbers on a page. And then, at the end, a single, brutal line about parental responsibilities and visitation. He wanted every other weekend. He wanted to be a part-time dad. I threw up, right there on the clean kitchen tiles. The acid bile burned my throat, a physical manifestation of the poison in that document. He wasn't just leaving me. He was scheduling his abandonment of our son. He was trading full-time fatherhood for every other weekend, like he was booking a tea time. The sheer, unadulterated selfishness of it took my breath away. I spent the rest of the day in a fog of rage and despair. I couldn't write. I couldn't think. I just paced the empty house, the unopened journal staring at me from the desk, accusing me. The pain was winning. The fear was winning. I was going to crack. I was going to become one of those women, hollowed out, bitter, defined solely by the wrong that had been done to them. That night, after putting Leo to bed, I didn't go to the journal. I went to the small box where I kept my nail supplies. I pulled out a bottle of acetone, some cotton balls, and a coarse grit file. I sat on the edge of my bathtub and I started to remove the shellac polish from my own nails. It was a mindless, physical task. The acrid smell filled the small room. I scraped and filed, watching the perfect, shiny burgundy color give way to the weak, naked nail beneath. This was what I did for a living. I built up. I created armor of color and art. Now I was stripping it all away. I was down to the last nail on my left hand when I stopped. I looked at my hands. Raw, exposed, slightly damaged from the acetone. They looked honest. For the first time in years, they weren't presenting a curated version of themselves. They were just hands. They were capable. They had held my child, made meals, earned a living, and written the truth in a journal. They were enough. I didn't put on new polish. I walked back to the desk. I opened the journal to a fresh page. The blankness didn't scare me this time. It was a challenge. I picked up my pen, but I didn't write about the divorce papers. I didn't write about the vomit on the floor or the rage in my heart. I made a list. Things I do not miss about Daniel Williams. The way he left his wet towel on the bed. His snoring. The constant, low-level criticism of my unambitious job. His inability to load the dishwasher correctly. The way he'd tell the same stories over and over at parties. His golf trips. The emotional weight of managing his moods. The sink full of beard trimmings. The silent treatment when he was angry. Feeling like I was constantly auditioning for the role of his wife. I stared at the list. It was petty. It was ridiculous. And it was the most liberating thing I had ever written. It was a tiny act of rebellion. It was me, taking back the narrative. He had chosen to leave, but I was now choosing to see that his absence wasn't just a void. It was also a space. A space that was no longer filled with wet towels and criticism and silent treatments. The realization was a tiny, fragile bud pushing through frozen ground. It wasn't joy. It wasn't happiness. It was something quieter, more fundamental, a sense of possibility. The life I had was gone, but that meant a new one could be built. And for the first time, I considered that I might get to decide what went into it. I might get to decide what was missing and what was not allowed back in. I closed the journal. The fear was still there. The loneliness was a cold companion, but they weren't the only tenants in the house of my body anymore. There was a new one, quiet but stubborn. Its name was Hope, and it had just written its first list. The list was a tiny crack in the dam. It didn't stop the flood of pain, but it allowed a different kind of water to trickle through. The water of clarity. The water of my own voice, however small it was. I started a new ritual. Every night, after the journal entry where I poured out the day's anger, or sadness, or fear, I would write one more thing. A list. Things I do not miss. Some days the lists were long. Some days, when the loneliness felt like a physical weight on my chest, I could only manage one item. The way he'd sigh dramatically if a movie didn't hold his attention. It didn't matter. The act itself was the point. It was me reasserting control over the narrative of my own life. He had written the story of our ending. I was writing the story of what came after. The divorce papers sat on the counter for a week. I finally called a lawyer. A sharp, no-nonsense woman named Brenda who didn't flinch when I started crying halfway through explaining the My Little Bird text. "We see it all, honey," she'd said, her voice devoid of pity but full of a steely resolve. "Let's just make sure he doesn't get the nest along with the bird." Her metaphor, so close to the one haunting me, felt like a sign. I was in the right hands. Dealing with the legalities was like conducting business in a foreign language. Asset division, parenting plan, mediation. I signed where Brenda told me to sign, my hand feeling disconnected from my body. I was protecting Leo. I was protecting the life I'd built with these hands. That was the only part that felt real. The rest of my life became a study in opposites. By day, I was mom. I was packed lunches, help with homework, bedtime stories in silly voices. I was a fortress of normalcy for my son, and the effort was exhausting. By night, I was the woman in the journal. The one who was angry, lost, and slowly, painstakingly, trying to find a map. One Saturday afternoon, the dichotomy became unbearable. Leo was at a friend's house. The house was silent, but it was the wrong kind of silence. It was the silence of waiting, of a life on pause. I looked at my hands. The naked nails had grown out a little, strong and plain. I hadn't polished them since the night of the stripping. I'd lost the urge to decorate them. It felt like putting a fresh coat of paint on a crumbling wall. I needed to do something that wasn't for anyone else. Not for a client, not for Leo, for me. The journal was on the desk. I'd filled nearly half of it. It was a record of survival. But it was passive. I was reacting. I needed to act. An idea, fragile and new, formed. I didn't just have to write about what I didn't miss. I could write about what I wanted. What I, Chloe the nail technician, the mom, the woman who was left, actually desired. The concept was so foreign it felt arrogant. Wanting things had been a luxury for so long. Wanting meant disappointment. I opened the journal to a blank page. I stared at it. The cursor in my mind blinked, waiting. What do I want? The question echoed in the empty house. I couldn't think of anything big. A new car, a vacation, a man. Those concepts were shapeless, meaningless. I had to start smaller, much smaller. I put the pen to paper. I want to sleep through the night. I want to eat a meal without feeling nauseous. I want to listen to a love song without wanting to break something. I want to go a full hour without thinking about him. I want to feel the sun on my face and actually feel warm. The wants were pathetic. They were the wants of a convalescent, but they were honest. They were mine. I kept writing, the wants getting slightly bigger, slightly more daring as I went. I want to read a book for fun. I want to try that new Thai place downtown. I want to get so good at something that it surprises me. I want to look in the mirror and not see a victim. I want to be able to say, I'm single, without it sounding like a disease. I filled a page, then two. It was like stretching a muscle that had atrophied. It was painful and exhilarating. I was not just documenting a life, I was designing one. Word by word, want by want. The following Thursday, I did something that would have been unthinkable a month ago. I called in sick to the salon. I never called in sick. But the thought of touching another person, of making pleasant conversation, of holding someone else's hand in mine felt like a violation. My hands needed a rest. My soul needed a rest. Instead, I dropped Leo at school, went back home, and did nothing. Absolutely nothing. I sat on the couch with a blanket and a cup of tea, and I stared out the window at the rain. I didn't write, I didn't clean, I didn't scroll mindlessly on my phone. I just was. I let the quiet of the empty house settle over me. And for the first time, it didn't feel lonely. It felt peaceful. It felt like my own. This was a new entry for my do not miss list. The constant, low-grade anxiety of performing for him. The performance was over. The curtain had fallen, the audience had left, and I was still here. And it was okay. Later that day, I was digging through a cupboard looking for a can of soup when I found it. Tucked at the back, behind the pots and pans we never used, was a small, dusty canvas bag. I pulled it out. Inside was a beginner's watercolor set I'd bought on a whim years ago, along with a pad of thick, textured paper. I'd never even opened it. Daniel had laughed when I brought it home. "What are you going to do with that? You're not an artist, you're a nail tech." I'd been so embarrassed, I'd shoved it in the back of the cupboard and forgotten about it. Now, I took it out. I wiped the dust off the plastic case. I opened it. The little cakes of color were pristine, untouched. I filled a jelly jar with water, took a brush, and sat at the kitchen table. I didn't try to paint anything real. I wasn't an artist. I was just a woman with a brush. I mixed colors. I made swirls. I let the water bleed the pigment across the paper in unpredictable ways. I made a mess. A beautiful blue and green and gold mess. It was the opposite of the precise, controlled work I did every day. There were no lines to stay within, no perfect shapes to create. I was so absorbed in the senseless, joyful act of it that I didn't hear the front door open. I didn't hear the footsteps. "Mommy," I jumped, splattering a droplet of Payne's gray onto the table. Leo was standing in the doorway of the kitchen, home from school, his backpack slung over one shoulder. He was staring at me, at the paints, at the colorful mess on the table. His expression was unreadable. My first instinct was shame, to quickly hide it all away, to make an excuse. Mommy's just being silly, to revert to the old script. But then I stopped. I looked at his curious face, and I decided on a new truth. "Hey, baby," I said, my voice calm. "I'm just painting. Do you want to try?" He dropped his backpack and came over, his eyes wide. "You're making a mess," he said, a hint of his father's judgment in his tone. I smiled, a real, genuine smile that felt strange on my face. "I know," I said. "It's fun. Here." I handed him a brush. He dipped it tentatively in the water, then into the bright red paint, and smeared a great, bold streak across the bottom of my paper. He looked at me, waiting for a scolding. "I love it," I said, and I meant it. "It's a fiery river." He grinned, a brilliant, uncomplicated flash of joy, and dove back in. We spent the next hour at that table, side by side, making a glorious, messy masterpiece. We didn't talk about Daddy. We didn't talk about the sad, quiet house. We talked about colors. We talked about fiery rivers and golden suns and deep blue oceans. It was the most connected I'd felt to him in weeks. I wasn't just managing his grief. I was sharing my small, fragile joy with him. I was showing him a new version of his mother. Not the one who cried in supermarkets, but the one who could make a mess and call it art. That night, after he was in bed, I went to my journal. I didn't write about pain. I didn't make a list of things I didn't miss. I painted. I used my watercolors to make a small, simple picture of a fiery red river flowing under a golden sun. It was childish and imperfect, and underneath it, I wrote a new heading. Things I am learning to want. The first entry was easy. I want more messy afternoons. The dam wasn't just cracked anymore, it was breaking. And what was coming through wasn't a trickle, it was a flood. And for the first time, I thought I might learn how to swim. The fiery river painting, now blotted and warped from its enthusiastic creation, was taped to the refrigerator with Leo's dinosaur magnets. It was the first thing I saw every morning when I came down to make coffee. It wasn't art. It was a flag. A declaration that this house, this life, was no longer a museum of what was lost, but a workshop for what was being built. The journaling became less about excavation and more about architecture. The pages of things I do not miss had given me a clean, level foundation. The pages of things I am learning to want were the blueprints. Now, I had to start building the walls. It started with a single, terrifying line in the journal, written one Tuesday evening. I want to tell someone the truth. Not Brenda the lawyer, not the page, a person, a friend. The isolation that had felt like protection now felt like a cage. I had become an island, and the silence was the ocean threatening to swallow me whole. My friends had called, of course, in the beginning, but I'd given them the polished, acceptable version. "We're having some problems, we're taking some space." I'd hidden the raw, screaming truth of it because I was ashamed that I'd failed, ashamed that I hadn't been enough to keep him. I'd performed okayness so well that they'd all stopped asking. There was one person, though, Maya, my oldest friend, the one who had known me before I was Chloe and Daniel, the one who lived 3 states away and whose voice on the phone felt like a lifeline thrown across the water. I called her on a Wednesday. My hand was shaking so badly, I almost dropped the phone. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright and familiar. "Chloe, oh my God, I was just thinking about you. How are you?" And I did it. I broke the script. I didn't say fine. I didn't say hanging in there. I took a breath that felt like it reached the very bottom of my lungs, and I said, "Maya, I'm not okay. Daniel cheated on me. I found out through a text. He's gone. And I am so lost." The silence on the other end was absolute. Then a soft, shattered inhalation. "Oh, honey, oh, my sweet girl, tell me everything." And I did. I told her everything. The bathroom, the text, the lie about Pete, the duffel bag, the cereal aisle, the vomit on the kitchen floor. The divorce papers, the watercolors, I held nothing back. The words poured out of me, a torrent of truth I had been damming up for weeks. I cried. She cried. It was messy and snotty and real. When I was finally done, spent and hollowed out again, but in a cleaner way, she didn't offer platitudes. She didn't trash Daniel, though I could hear the fury simmering in her voice. She just said, "I'm getting on a plane, this weekend. Don't argue with me." She came. She descended upon my quiet, wounded house like a hurricane of love and good takeout. She didn't try to fix me. She just witnessed me. She sat with me on the couch while I cried. She played Legos with Leo until he was shrieking with laughter. She looked at my journal, not with pity, but with reverence. "This is your fight club," she said, nodding with approval. "This is how you're getting strong." Her presence was a mirror held up to my life, and in it, I started to see reflections of the woman I'd been before Daniel. The woman who was funny, the woman who was brave, the woman Maya knew was still in there, buried under 11 years of compromise and curated quiet. "Remember that time in college," she said on her last night, as we shared a bottle of wine on the back porch, "when you dyed your hair that horrific shade of purple because you said you wanted to feel like a different person for a week?" I laughed, a real, unforced sound that surprised me. It was awful. It turned my pillowcase purple. "But you did it," she said, pointing her wine glass at me. "You wanted to, so you did it. You didn't ask for permission. That's the Chloe I miss. The one who does things because she wants to." The comment lodged itself in my brain. After she left, the house felt both emptier and fuller. Emptier because her vibrant energy was gone. Fuller because she had left behind the echo of that forgotten Chloe. The next day, I looked in the mirror. I saw the tired eyes, the hair that needed a cut, the face of a woman who had been through a war. But I also saw something else. A glint. A flicker of the girl who dyed her hair purple. I didn't dye my hair, but I did drive to the art supply store. I walked past the beginner watercolor sets. I went to the professional aisle. I bought heavy, expensive paper. I bought tubes of rich, pigmented color. I bought brushes that felt like magic wands in my hand. It was an extravagance. It was an act of profound faith in a self I wasn't sure existed yet. I brought them home and set them up on the kitchen table, which was now permanently designated as my messy space. Leo was fascinated by the new, fancy paints. "What are you going to paint, Mommy?" he asked, his little finger carefully tracing the label on a tube of cobalt blue. I looked out the window. The storm bird painting from my grandmother was watching me from the living room wall. "I'm going to paint a bird," I said, "but not the one from the painting." I sketched for hours, my tongue caught between my teeth in concentration. I wasn't a trained artist. It was clumsy. The proportions were all wrong, but I didn't care. I was doing it. I painted a sparrow. But this one wasn't perched on a branch. It was in mid-flight, its wings a powerful, blurred motion of defiance. And it wasn't flying away from a storm. It was flying directly into it, its beak open not in a cry of fear, but in a song of sheer, audacious joy. The sky behind it wasn't gray. It was a swirling, tumultuous mix of every color I had, fiery reds, deep blues, brilliant golds. The storm wasn't something to be endured, it was something that made the flight more beautiful. It took me a week. I painted every night after Leo was in bed. I got paint on the floor. I ruined a good shirt. I didn't care. I was creating something that had never existed in the world before. It was mine. When I finally put the last brushstroke on the paper, a highlight in the bird's determined eye, I stepped back. It was messy. It was imperfect. The wings were a bit lopsided, but it was alive. It vibrated with energy and color and hope. I taped it up on the wall next to my grandmother's painting. The two birds, side by side, told a story. One was ready for the storm. One was singing in the middle of it. Leo came down the next morning and saw it. He stared at it for a long time, his cereal spoon suspended in midair. "I like that one, Mommy," he said finally. "It looks brave." Tears pricked my eyes, but they were the good kind. The kind that meant something was healing. "Yeah," I whispered, my voice thick. "Me too." That afternoon, I had to go to the courthouse to sign some finalized mediation papers with Brenda. I dressed in a simple black dress. I put on mascara. I looked at my naked nails and on a whim I painted them, not a client's color, My color. A bold, unapologetic cobalt blue, the exact shade for my painting. As I walked into the stark, formal building, I didn't feel like a victim. I didn't feel like a respondent. I felt like a woman in a black dress with blue nails who had friends who flew across states for her, a son who thought she was brave, and a bird on her wall that sang in the middle of a storm. I signed the papers with a steady hand. The pen didn't shake. The signature was mine, clear and definitive. Brenda looked at me, a small, approving smile on her face. "You okay?" I looked out the window at the gray sky. For the first time, I didn't see a threat. I saw a beautiful, dramatic backdrop. "Yes," I said, and for the first time, I knew it wasn't a lie. I was okay. I was in the middle of the storm, and I was still flying. More than that, I was starting to enjoy the view. The realization was my new strong finale. The quiet wasn't something to be feared or curated anymore. It was the space between the notes of my new song, and I was finally learning how to sing it. The signed papers sat in a neat, terrifyingly final stack on my kitchen table. The divorce wasn't completely over. There were still months of procedural nonsense ahead, but the battle lines were drawn, the terms set. The war for my old life was concluded. I had lost. But the strange thing was, standing there in my kitchen with my blue nails and my bird painting on the wall, it didn't feel like a loss. It felt like a treaty had been signed with a foreign power I was no longer obligated to. I was a sovereign nation again. Small, perhaps, a bit battered, but mine. This new sovereignty came with practicalities. The first and most pressing was money. Daniel's child support was adequate, but my income from the salon had always been supplemental. It was the fun money, the vacation fund, the buffer. Now it needed to be an anchor. The thought of going back to the salon full-time, of immersing myself in that world of gossip and petty dramas, made my skin crawl. My hands, which now spent their free time holding paintbrushes, recoiled at the thought of going back to holding buffers and drills for 8 hours a day. I was talking to Maya on the phone, venting about this new anxiety. I can't go back to doing 50 sets of acrylics a week, Maya. I'll lose my mind, but I need the money. "So do something else," she said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Do what? I'm a nail tech. It's what I know." "Chloe, you're an artist," she corrected, her voice firm. "You paint tiny, perfect masterpieces on fingertips. You just painted a gigantic, powerful masterpiece on your wall. Stop defining yourself by the where. Start defining yourself by the what." The what? The what was art. The what was creation. The idea didn't come in a lightning bolt. It came in a slow, dawning sunrise. It started with a client. Mrs. Gable, a sweet, older woman whose hands were gnarled with arthritis, but who still came in every week for a simple buff and polish. She saw my bird painting during her appointment the day after I'd finished it. "Oh, my dear," she'd said, her voice full of genuine awe. "Did you do that? It's magnificent. It makes my heart feel brave just looking at it." The comment stuck with me. It makes my heart feel brave. Later that week, I was in Leo's room, trying to persuade him to part with some broken toys for donation. I found the old, discarded plastic toy capsule, the one that had started it all. I held it in my hands, this stupid, cheap piece of plastic that had once held a cheap, rubber scorpion, the symbol of my humiliation, but it wasn't that anymore. Now it was just a shape, a blank, curved surface. An idea, fragile and new, whispered in my mind. I took the capsule to my kitchen table-turned studio. I cleaned it. I sanded it lightly. And then, with my finest brush and a drop of black acrylic paint, I began to paint. I didn't think, I just let my hand move. I painted a tiny, intricate scene on its curved surface. A single, determined dandelion seed, caught on a breeze, floating against a microscopic starry sky. It was a story of letting go and journeying into the unknown, painted on the very object that had once represented my captivity. I showed it to Leo. "Whoa," he breathed, holding it carefully in his palm. "You painted the magic back into it, Mommy. You painted the magic back into it. That was it. That was the what." The next day, I didn't go to the salon. I went to the craft store. I bought a dozen plain, white ceramic ring dishes. I bought small, smooth stones. I bought plain wooden boxes, blank slates. I brought them home and I got to work. I painted a ring dish with a swirling galaxy, a tiny moon nestled in the center to hold the ring. I painted a stone with a single, perfect autumn leaf. I painted a box with a landscape so tiny and detailed you felt you could step into it. I was using the same skills I'd honed for years on nails: the steady hand, the eye for detail, the understanding of color. But I was unleashing them on a new canvas. I was telling stories, small, silent, beautiful stories of resilience and hope. I didn't know what to do with them. I just knew I had to make them. The act of creation was a therapy more potent than any journal entry. I was taking blank, worthless objects and imbuing them with meaning. I was alchemizing my pain into beauty. It was Maya, again, who gave me the final push. I sent her pictures of my creations. Her response was immediate: Etsy. Now, right now, call the shop the Painted Sparrow. The name felt right. It felt like me. Setting up the online shop was a terrifying plunge into the unknown. Taxes, SEO, shipping, logistics. It was a language I didn't speak, but I learned. I stayed up late watching YouTube tutorials. I read articles. I asked questions in online forums. The fear was there, a constant hum, but it was now accompanied by a new sound: the thrill of building something that was entirely, unequivocally mine. I listed my first 5 items on a Tuesday night: the Galaxy ring dish, the leaf stone, the dandelion seed toy capsule, and 2 others. I priced them with a courage I didn't feel, calculating not just the cost of materials, but the value of my time, my vision, my story. I expected nothing. I told myself it was just an experiment, a hobby. The next morning, I got my first notification: a sale, then another. By the end of the week, all 5 items had sold, and I had 15 custom orders in my inbox. People weren't just buying a ring dish. They were buying the story. They were buying the hope. They were buying a piece of the magic I had painted back into the world. I stood in the post office a week later, a queue of packages under my arm, each one containing a small, hand-painted piece of art. Each one addressed to a stranger. I was no longer just Chloe, the nail technician. I was Chloe, the artist, the founder of the Painted Sparrow. The feeling that washed over me as I handed the stack to the postal worker wasn't pride, exactly. It was deeper than that. It was validity. I drove to the salon that afternoon. My boss, Linda, was understanding. "I wondered when you'd be back," she said, wiping down her station. "I'm not," I said, and the words were both terrifying and exhilarating. "I'm giving my notice. I can't do full-time anymore. I'll stay on for a few regulars, 1 or 2 days a week. But I've started my own thing." Linda's eyebrows shot up. She looked at me, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time. She saw the blue nails, the new light in my eyes, the set of my shoulders. She didn't argue. She just smiled, a slow, genuine smile. "Good for you, Chloe. Really, what's the thing?" "I paint," I said, and for the first time the statement didn't feel like a hobbyist's confession. It felt like a declaration. "I paint things that make people's hearts feel brave." I left the salon with a new, lighter schedule and a heart that was threatening to beat out of my chest. I had done it. I had jumped. And instead of falling, I had discovered I could fly. That night, I opened my journal. The entry was short. "Today, I am no longer what I was. I am what I create. And what I create is brave." I looked at the 2 birds on my wall, the one ready for the storm and the one singing in it. I was both. And for the first time, I understood that the song wasn't just about joy. It was a battle cry. A declaration sung in a voice I was only just beginning to recognize as my own. The rhythm of my new life was a song I was composing 1 note at a time. The melody was the scratch of my paintbrush on ceramic. The harmony was the hum of the postal printer spouting out shipping labels. And the bass line was the solid, steady beat of my own heart. I was busy in a way I had never been before, but it wasn't the draining busyness of performing a life. It was the vibrant, chaotic busyness of building one. The Painted Sparrow was more than a shop. It was a lifeline. Orders poured in, each one a small vote of confidence from the universe. Women bought the Storm Bird paperweights for friends going through divorces. Men bought the Galaxy ring dishes for proposals. Someone bought the dandelion seed capsule and wrote in the notes, "Thank you for painting the magic back. I needed this reminder." I wasn't just making a living, I was building a community of the quietly brave, one painted stone at a time. This new equilibrium was fragile, and I knew it. I held my breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop. It dropped on a rainy Thursday afternoon in the form of a text message from Daniel. "I'm outside. I'm here to see Leo." My blood ran cold. He hadn't seen Leo in over a month. His calls were sporadic, his interest perfunctory. According to the parenting plan Brenda had ruthlessly negotiated, this was his scheduled weekend. I knew it was coming. I had mentally prepared for it. But seeing the text, knowing he was just on the other side of the door, felt like an invasion. I looked at Leo, who was building an elaborate Lego spaceship at the kitchen table, completely oblivious. "Hey, buddy," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "Daddy's here to see you." Leo's head snapped up. His expression was a confusing mix of excitement and anxiety. Now, I said, forcing a smile. "Go get your overnight bag. It's by the door." I walked to the front door, my heart hammering against my ribs. This was it. The first handoff. The first time I would have to see him, face to face, and not scream, not cry, not fall apart. I had to be a diplomat for my son's sake. I opened the door. He was standing on the porch, getting wet in the drizzle. He looked smaller. His shoulders were hunched against the rain, and he had a new, uneasy energy about him. The confidence I'd always associated with him was gone. He looked like a man who had lost his way. "Chloe," he said, his voice flat. "Daniel," I replied. My voice didn't shake. I held the door open just wide enough for him to see the hallway, but not to enter. This was my territory now. An awkward silence descended, filled only by the sound of the rain. His eyes darted past me, into the house, and then did a double take. They landed on the wall in the living room, where my 2 bird paintings hung. I saw his gaze travel from my grandmother's somber sparrow to my own joyful, defiant one. His brow furrowed slightly, as if he were trying to solve a puzzle he couldn't quite understand. "You're painting?" he finally asked, the question laced with a confusion that bordered on accusation. "Yes," I said. It was a simple, complete sentence. It required no further explanation. He blinked, thrown by my brevity. He was waiting for more. For me to justify myself, to seek his approval, to fall into our old pattern. I just stood there, silent. The power in the exchange had subtly, irrevocably shifted. Leo came thundering down the hallway, his backpack slung over his shoulder. "Daddy?" Daniel's face transformed, a genuine smile breaking through his unease. "Hey, big man." He scooped Leo up into a hug. The sight of it, my son in his father's arms, was a physical ache in my chest. It was the right thing, but it was so hard. "Be good for your dad," I said, kissing the top of Leo's head, inhaling his little boy's smell. "I love you to the moon and back. I love you to Jupiter and back," he chirped, already pulling Daniel toward the car. Daniel looked back at me, standing in the doorway. His eyes did another quick scan of me. He saw the cobalt blue polish on my nails, the paint smudge on my jeans, the new, calm steadiness in my posture. I saw the moment he realized it. The woman standing in front of him was not the woman he had left. That woman was gone. This one was someone he didn't know. "I'll have him back Sunday by 6, he said, his voice quieter now. "I know," I said. "The agreement says 6. Another flicker of confusion in his eyes. I was speaking the language of boundaries, and he was not fluent. He turned and walked Leo to his car. I watched them go, my hand on the doorframe. I didn't shut the door until the car's taillights had disappeared around the corner. The silence that descended was profound. It was the first time I had been truly, completely alone in the house since he left. No Leo, no Daniel. Just me and the quiet. I expected the loneliness to descend like a wolf. I expected to crumble. I walked from room to room, waiting for the grief to ambush me. But it didn't. The house didn't feel empty. It felt spacious. It was filled with my things, my art on the walls, my projects on the table, my silence. I ended up in the living room, standing before the 2 bird paintings. I looked from one to the other. My grandmother's gift had been a prophecy. My own work was the fulfillment. A strange energy buzzed under my skin. This was my time, 2 whole days. I could do anything. I could binge-watch terrible TV. I could work on orders. I could call Maya and dissect the entire, awkward interaction. But I didn't want to do any of those things. I felt a pull, a need to mark this moment, to claim this space in a new, definitive way. I went to the garage and found what I was looking for. A can of paint I'd bought months ago, intending to touch up the trim. It was a color called Seafoam Serenity. It was a soft, calming, beautiful green-blue. The exact opposite of the sterile, off-white Daniel had insisted on for the living room. I didn't overthink it. I dragged the ladder in. I laid drop cloths on the floor. I opened the can, the sharp, promising smell of fresh paint filling the air. I loaded a roller and I pressed it to the wall. The first stroke was a revelation. It was a bold, wet slash of color over the bland beige of my old life. It was an act of rebellion. It was a declaration. With every roll, I was painting him out. I was covering the walls that had heard our arguments and witnessed my tears with a new, serene color. My color. I painted for hours. I painted until my arms ached and my hair was dusted with a fine mist of seafoam serenity. I painted as the sun went down and I had to turn on all the lights. I didn't stop until every last inch of his boring, safe, impersonal beige was gone. When I finally put the roller down, the room was transformed. The new color made the white trim pop. It made my bird paintings look like they were flying in a clear, tropical sky. It made the room feel like mine. Wholly, completely, undeniably mine. I was sitting on the floor, surrounded by the smell of paint, admiring my work, when I heard a car pull into the driveway. It was too early for Daniel to bring Leo back. My heart leapt into my throat. Was it him? Had he forgotten something? I went to the door, my paint-splattered self, and looked out the window. It wasn't Daniel's car. It was a taxi, and getting out of it was my grandmother. I flung the door open. "Gran, what are you doing here?" She stood on the porch, a small suitcase at her feet, her eyes twinkling. "Maya called me, said you might need some reinforcements on your first solo night. And it seems," she said, her sharp eyes taking in my paint-splattered clothes and the glorious chaos of the living room behind me, that I was right. She stepped inside and stopped dead. She looked at the new color on the walls. She looked at the two bird paintings, now perfectly at home in their new environment. Her gaze swept over the drop cloths, the ladder, the open can of paint. A slow, proud smile spread across her face. "Well, would you look at that?" she whispered, her voice full of wonder. "My little bird, you're not just flying, you're remodeling the entire sky." She turned to me, her eyes shining. And in that moment, surrounded by the evidence of my own strength, with the woman who had given me my first wings standing in my newly painted living room, I felt it. The final, solidified truth. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of potential. The house wasn't a monument to what was lost. It was a canvas for what was to come, and I was no longer a woman who had been left. I was the artist, and I was just getting started. The smell of fresh paint and my grandmother's lavender perfume became the new scent of my home. It was the smell of transformation, of history and future braided together. Gran stayed for a week, a whirlwind of quiet strength and unsentimental love. She didn't coddle me. She didn't ask prying questions about Daniel. Instead, she taught Leo how to make her famous buttermilk biscuits. She helped me reorganize the kitchen cabinets, a task I'd been meaning to do for years. She sat with me in the evenings while I painted my sparrow orders, her knitting needles clicking a soft, rhythmic accompaniment to the scratch of my brush. Her presence was a balm. She was living proof that a woman could build a beautiful life on the other side of heartbreak. She'd done it herself decades ago. Watching her, I saw the blueprint for my own future. It wasn't about finding a new man to fill the space. It was about building a life so full and rich that the space itself became a cherished feature, not a void. When she left, hugging me tight at the airport, she whispered in my ear, "You don't need a man to complete you, Chloe. You need a life that does, and it looks to me like you're well on your way." Her words stayed with me. I threw myself into my new rhythm. The painted sparrow was thriving. I'd hired a local high school student to help with packaging and shipping 2 afternoons a week, a move that felt terrifyingly professional. My 2 days a week at the salon felt different now. I wasn't there out of necessity. I was there by choice. I enjoyed the familiar rhythm of it, the connection with my longtime clients. But my heart was in my kitchen-turned studio. Every order that shipped out felt like a little piece of my soul, my hard-won hope, being sent out into the world. The divorce was finalized on a bright, cold Tuesday in October. There was no dramatic courtroom scene. It was a series of emails and a final document signed in Brenda's office. I signed my name with the same cobalt blue pen I used to label my shipping boxes. It felt right. When Brenda handed me the stamped copy, I expected to feel a seismic shift. A final, crashing wave of grief. But I didn't. I felt light. The weight of the legal battle, the constant low-grade anxiety of the process, was gone. It was just a piece of paper. It didn't define me. My life, my joy, my son, my art, those define me. The divorce was just the receipt for a transaction that had already been completed months ago in a steamy bathroom. I celebrated by taking Leo out for pizza. We went to the noisy, chaotic place with the video games and the sticky floors. We ate too much. He beat me at air hockey 3 times in a row, his triumphant cheers music to my ears. He was adjusting. He was happy. He talked about his weekends with Daniel less and less, folding them into the narrative of his life as just another activity, like soccer practice or a playdate. He was building his own new normal, and I was its steady, unwavering center. It was on one of these weekends, when Leo was with Daniel, that the strange restlessness returned. The house was quiet. The orders were packed and shipped. The living room was perfectly, serenely green. I had nothing to do. The frantic energy of survival had faded, leaving a calm I wasn't quite used to. I found myself cleaning out the hall closet, the last bastion of untouched, shared history. I pulled out old coats, forgotten scarves, a box of photographs. And then I found it. Tucked away on the top shelf, behind my winter boots, was Daniel's old guitar case. He'd played in a band in college, a fact he'd once been proud of but had let fade into the background of his corporate life. He hadn't touched it in years. I lifted the case down. It was dusty. I laid it on the floor and clicked the latches. The inside was lined with faded red velvet. The guitar itself was beautiful, a well-worn acoustic with a sunburst finish. I plucked a string. The note hung in the quiet air, warm and resonant. I don't know what came over me. I'd never played an instrument, but I picked it up. It was heavier than I expected. I settled it on my lap, the way I'd seen people do in movies. I placed my fingers clumsily on the strings and strummed. The sound was a horrible, discordant crunch. I laughed. The sound of my own laughter, unprompted and genuine, echoed in the empty house. I tried again, another awful noise. It was ridiculous. Me, Chloe the nail technician, the mom, the artist, sitting on her hallway floor trying to play a guitar that wasn't hers. But I didn't stop. There was a beginner's book inside the case. Teach Yourself Guitar. I propped it open. I learned how to tune the strings, my ear straining for the right pitch. I learned a C major chord. My fingers ached, pressing down on the steel strings. I didn't care. The pain was a good pain, a productive pain. I spent the entire afternoon there, on the floor, surrounded by the detritus of the cleaned-out closet. I didn't get good. I could barely manage a slow, clumsy transition between 2 chords. But that wasn't the point. The point was the trying. The point was the making of a new, terrible, beautiful noise in my quiet house. It was another act of claiming. This wasn't his guitar anymore. It was mine, and I would learn to make it sing. When Leo came home on Sunday, he stopped in his tracks at the sight of the guitar leaning against the wall. "Whoa, is that Daddy's?" "It is," I said. I'm learning to play it." His eyes went wide with disbelief. "You play guitar? Why not me?" I asked, smiling. He had no answer. He just shook his head, a grin spreading across his face. "That's so weird, Mommy. Can you play me a song?" "Not yet," I said, picking it up. "But I can play you a chord. Listen." I carefully placed my sore fingers and strummed a slow, slightly off C major. Leo listened, his head cocked. "It sounds bumpy," I laughed. "It does. But someday it won't." That night, after he was asleep, I didn't paint. I didn't write in my journal. I sat on the couch with the guitar. I practiced my bumpy C major. I tried to add a G chord. It was even harder. My fingers wouldn't stretch right. I was about to give up in frustration when my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "Hi, Chloe, it's Ben Miller, Leo's substitute teacher from last month. Leo told me today you're learning guitar. I give lessons, just thought I'd offer. No pressure." I stared at the message. Ben Miller. I remembered him. He'd subbed for Leo's class for a week while his teacher was out. He was young, maybe in his early 30s, with kind eyes and a calm demeanor. Leo had liked him. He'd come home talking about how Mr. Miller could whistle any song and knew all the best dinosaur facts. My first instinct was panic. A man texting me. It felt like a betrayal of the careful, all-female world I'd built around myself. My second instinct was to say no. Thank you, but no, I was busy. I was a mother. I was healing. But then I looked at the guitar in my lap. I looked at my hands, the nails short and practical, the fingertips red and sore from the strings. I thought of the woman who had painted a seafoam green wall and started an Etsy shop. That woman wasn't afraid of a guitar lesson. I took a breath. I typed back. Hi, Ben. That's really kind of you to offer. Leo speaks very highly of you. I am painfully beginner, but I'm determined. When do you teach? I held my phone, my heart doing a nervous, fluttery rhythm I hadn't felt in over a year. It wasn't excitement. It wasn't attraction. It was the thrill of a new door cracking open. A door I was choosing to open myself. His reply came a moment later. How about Tuesday evening? My last lesson is at 6. You could come by at 7? I looked around my living room, at my paintings, at my son's toys scattered by the couch. At my life, it was full, it was good, it was mine. Adding a guitar lesson wasn't about filling a space. It was about expanding the borders of what was possible. I typed my reply, my fingers steady. Tuesday at 7 works. See you then. I put the phone down. I picked up the guitar. I placed my fingers on the fretboard, and I strummed that bumpy, terrible, wonderful C major chord. The note hung in the air, full of promise. It was the sound of a new song beginning. And for the first time, I couldn't wait to hear how it would sound. The 2 days between my text to Ben and Tuesday at 7 p.m. stretched and contracted in a way time hadn't since the early, raw days of the divorce. It was a nervous, fizzy energy, entirely different from the leaden weight of grief. This was the anxiety of a first day of school, of a job interview, of stepping onto a stage. It was terrifying, and it was alive. I almost canceled 6 times. I drafted texts and then deleted them. What was I doing? I was a divorced mother with a small business and a son and a life that was finally, blessedly calm. I didn't need to invite a strange man, a guitar teacher, into the delicate ecosystem I had built. It felt like introducing a foreign species that could either flourish or destroy everything. But then I'd look at the guitar, leaning against the wall in the living room like a promise. I'd remember the feeling of the wood against my leg, the ache in my fingertips, the horrible, wonderful noise I had made. I hadn't felt that particular brand of clumsy, hopeful curiosity in over a decade. I didn't want to let it go. So, on Tuesday evening, I went. I dropped Leo at his friend's house for a playdate, my hands gripping the steering wheel with the same intensity they had months ago, but for an entirely different reason. I wasn't driving away from a catastrophe, I was driving toward a possibility. Ben taught lessons out of a small music shop downtown, a place that smelled of old wood, rosin, and dust. It was comforting. It felt real. He was waiting for me just inside the door, and he looked exactly as I remembered from the one time I'd met him at school pickup. Kind eyes, a easy smile, dressed in jeans and a worn-in sweater. He didn't look at me with pity or curiosity. He looked at me like a person who was there to learn guitar. "Chloe," he said, his voice warm, "right on time, come on back." He led me to a small room in the back, soundproofed with egg crate foam, filled with amps, stands, and 2 stools. He handed me the sunburst guitar. "This is a beautiful instrument," he said, strumming it once. The chord rang out, perfect and clear. It's been waiting for someone to play it. He started with the basics, how to hold it, how to tune it properly. He was a natural teacher, patient, clear, and funny. He didn't flinch when my C major chord buzzed and sputtered. He just nodded and said, "Yep, that's what it's supposed to sound like at first. Your fingers are building muscles they've never needed before. It's like therapy for your hands." The hour flew by. We didn't talk about my life. We didn't talk about my divorce. We talked about calluses and chord transitions and the weirdly satisfying pain of pressing steel strings. For 60 minutes, I wasn't Chloe the survivor, or Chloe the entrepreneur, or Chloe the mom. I was just Chloe, the student. It was a profound and unexpected relief. At the end of the lesson, as I was packing the guitar away, he said, "So, you're Leo's mom. He's a great kid, sharp as a tack." "Thank you," I said, my guard instinctively rising a fraction. This was where it would come, the questions, but they didn't, he just smiled. "He told me you paint things, that you have a whole business. That's amazing." It was the way he said it. There was no ulterior motive, no judgment. Just pure, simple admiration. "It keeps me busy," I said, a non-answer. "The best things usually do," he replied easily. He held the shop door open for me. "Next week, same time." I stood on the sidewalk, the cool night air sharp on my cheeks. The lesson was over. The safe, structured hour had ended. The ball was in my court. I could say no. I could retreat back to my perfectly curated, quiet, safe life. I looked back at him, standing in the warm light of the shop doorway. He wasn't a predator. He wasn't a savior. He was just a guy who gave good guitar lessons and had kind eyes. Yes, I found myself saying. Next week. I drove home, my mind quiet. The frantic, fizzy anxiety was gone, replaced by a steady hum of contentment. I had done it. I had stepped through the door, and the world hadn't ended. It had, in fact, added a new, pleasant chord. The lessons became a Tuesday night ritual. I'd drop Leo at his playdate, go to the shop, and spend an hour in that small, soundproofed room, building calluses and learning songs. Ben was exactly what he appeared to be. A good, decent, interesting man. He was a listener. He remembered things. The second week, he had a strap for the guitar because I'd mentioned it was heavy. The third week, he had printed out the tab for a simple version of a song by a band I'd said I liked. It was in the fourth week that the shift happened. I was fumbling through a new chord progression, my tongue between my teeth in concentration. I finally got it right, a slow, clean strum of G, C, and D. I looked up, grinning with a triumph that felt childish and pure. Ben was smiling back at me, but his smile was different. It was softer, deeper. His eyes held mine for a beat too long. The air in the small room changed. It became charged, thick with something unspoken. I felt a blush creep up my neck. I looked down at the guitar, suddenly unable to meet his gaze. The rest of the lesson was a blur. I could feel the awareness between us, a new live wire that had been switched on. When the hour was up, I packed up the guitar with clumsy hands. "You're doing really great, Chloe," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "Thanks to you," I mumbled, focusing on the latch of the case. He walked me to the door, but instead of holding it open for me to leave, he leaned against the frame. "I was wondering," he said, his tone carefully casual. "There's a new coffee shop that opened a few blocks over. They have live music sometimes. I was thinking of checking it out this weekend. If you're not busy, maybe you'd want to join me?" There it was, the line, the invitation out of the teacher-student dynamic and into something else, something unknown. My heart was a wild drum against my ribs. Every instinct screamed to run, to retreat, to say I was busy, to protect the fragile peace I'd worked so hard to build. But I made myself look at him. I saw the hope in his eyes, carefully tempered by the patience I'd come to know. He wasn't pushing. He was just asking. I thought of my journal, the list of things I am learning to want. I thought of the woman who had painted a wall and started a business and learned to play a bumpy C chord. That woman was brave. That woman was curious. That woman wanted to go to a coffee shop, but she also had a son and a life and a heart that was still tender in places. I took a breath. "Ben," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, "that sounds really nice, but I need to be clear. My son is my priority. My life is complicated. I'm not ready for," I trailed off, struggling to find the right words that wouldn't sound like a rejection of him, but a protection of me. He nodded, his expression understanding. "How about this?" he said gently. "It's just coffee, no expectations, no pressure. We can talk about music, or not talk at all. We can just be, just coffee." Two words that held a universe of possibility and terror. I looked out at the street, at the quiet town settling in for the night. I thought of my quiet house waiting for me. It was so safe, so known. And then I thought of the bird in my painting, singing into the storm. It hadn't waited for the skies to clear. It had found its song in the middle of the chaos. I looked back at Ben. I gave him a small, real smile. "Just coffee," I agreed. Saturday afternoon? The relief and joy that lit up his face was its own kind of music. "Saturday afternoon," he confirmed. "I'll text you the details." I walked to my car, my legs feeling like jelly. I had done it. I had said yes. Not a yes to a grand romance. Not a yes to filling a void, but a yes to a coffee. A yes to curiosity. A yes to the possibility of a connection that was based not on what I could be for someone, but on who I already was. When I got home, I didn't call Maya. I didn't write in my journal. I picked up the guitar. I sat on my seafoam green couch in my quiet, beloved living room, and I practiced my chord progression. G, C, D. The chords were clearer now, stronger. The song was still simple, but it was no longer bumpy. It was becoming music. The realization that settled over me was my strong finale, the truth that would linger long after the scene ended. I was no longer afraid of the quiet because I had learned to make my own noise. And I was no longer afraid of the unknown because I had learned that I was the one who got to decide what to let in. The door was open, not all the way, just a crack, and for now, the light spilling through was enough.